so this demonstration is on mechanical drawing. All right, you good to go? Okay, it's on mechanical drawing, which is basically a little different than freehand drawing, which you might have learned in like art or something, like sketching and that sort of thing. So this is called mechanical because you're using tools to help you get straight, parallel, perpendicular lines and whatnot. So these are some of the tools that we'll be using. So some of the basics is, in class at least, you'll have a drawing board. This is just a flat sheet of wood essentially with perpendicular parallel edges. T-square, this is the most common one, looks like a T, all right. This will give you perpendicular lines or parallel lines with respect to one of the edges. You can learn about that in a second. So for those that are remote, you hopefully can pick one of these up unless you have one. Some right triangles, there's a 45, 45, 90, 45, 45, 90, and a 30, 60, 90, which you can use for making different angles. You can also stack them together to get increments of every 15 degrees. That's what the first activity will show you. All right, you have an eraser, hopefully you know what that is. You have, these things are called drafting dots. This is basically just masking tape cut into circles. So if you don't have that at home, which most of you probably don't, you could use any kind of tape. Just try and use something like masking tape would be ideal, like the white kind of painter's tape, because it peels off easily. If you use duct tape or packaging tape or something, it's going to be hard to peel it off the table, and your parents might not be too happy. So use something that has an easy release, okay? Don't use bubble gum or anything like that, because that clearly won't work out too well. All right, this thing here, fancy looking tool, this is an eraser shield. Super convenient, you'll learn what that does in a minute, but essentially what you can do if you have two lines next to each other, you put the shield over the part that you don't want to erase and erase through these slots, and you can erase next to something without erasing something you don't want to erase. All right, you have this thing here called an architect scale. I gave you the printable one online. Those in class can use the physical one. So this has architect on an end, has a ruler on one side, and then there's different architect scales you'll learn about a little bit later for scaling big things like buildings down to fit on paper like this. Last but not least, you have pencils. I'll provide some of these to take home for those that are remote also. You've probably taken the SAT or PSAT at some point in your life, and they say use a number 2 pencil. The number 2 refers to the type of graphite or type of lead that's inside of it. We don't use lead anymore because it's toxic. We use graphite, but anyhow, so there's some numbers on the end. This one's a little short, but this is 2H. The other kind I have in class is a 6H. All right, so essentially, the higher the H, the harder the graphite is. So the harder the graphite, the thinner or lighter the line will be, assuming you have the same pressure and your pencil tip is the same amount of same sharpness. All right. So the pencil scale goes from like a 8B to an 8H. All right. We have a 2H and a 6H, but basically the B's are really soft. They're for like shading and darkening in areas. You'd use them more in an art class. For like mechanical drawing, you need a light pencil and a dark pencil. So like a 2 and a 6 or a 2 and an 8, even depending on what's available to get different thicknesses of lines. Okay, so that's the basics of the tools. All right, so drawing setup. So this is one of the most important steps. So if you don't remember anything from this video, remember this, so you at least have parallel and perpendicular lines. Take an edge of your drawing board at home. If you're doing this, you can use the edge of a table or a desk or a center island or a kitchen table, something with a flat surface and a straight edge. Okay, so take the edge of your T-square, put it firm on that edge, take your paper of whatever size you have to work with, doesn't matter. Here we have just printer paper, 8.5 by 11. If you have bigger paper at home, that's fine. Slide it till it touches the top edge of your square. Now, this edge is perpendicular to this edge, and this is parallel to here. We want to keep it that way, so we're going to tape it down. So take your masking tape or your Scotch tape or whatever kind of tape you have, and just tape your corners down. So this way it doesn't move. This is your key step. If you're at home, you could probably leave it taped down. If not, you can just re-square it up like I just showed you and keep working on the same drawing in a different location if you run out of time. So this is the most important step. Make sure that your paper is square with the edge. You can always double check it. If you look here, you can see that it's parallel to that edge. If you mess that up, your lines will not be parallel and perpendicular to the page. It won't look good, and they won't be at right angles to each other. All right, next we're going to create a border. All right, so the Video and Ed puzzle, if you watch that at some point, says to make an 1/8 inch border. There's no like standard border size. For our class, we'll use a 1/2 inch. So take your ruler or your printable ruler and locate where a 1/2 inch is. So this is 1 inch, so 1/2 inch would be half of that. So measure in from each page corner or each edge and just make one light mark. All right, ideally this should be done with the 6H pencil because the harder pencils are also easier to erase. So if you're gonna make temporary layout lines like I'm doing right now, use the harder pencil so it's with a light pressure so it's easy to erase. So I just need a light mark at a 1/2 inch, light mark at a 1/2 inch from each paper edge. Now I only need to make one mark because the T-square will allow me to extend that line as far as I want. So lightly, I'm going to take the 6H pencil to start with and draw a line across the page. All right, then I'll slide this up to the top and make my top border line across. All right, now to get my vertical lines, I'll use one of my right triangles. Okay, so either one doesn't matter. They both have right 90-degree angles. So I'll hook this on here and then put this on my T-square, making sure the T-square is tight on the edge. If the T-square is crooked, I won't get a perpendicular angle, so keep it tight. Many of you will be tempted to do this and slide it to the top, okay? This will not work for a couple reasons. One, if you're using a table the size of this, okay, you probably don't have a T-square that big. Number two, if your corners are not perpendicular on the table, your lines aren't going to be perpendicular. So these triangles are mass-produced to be perpendicular, so we'll trust them. So I'll slide it along my T-square edge and then use this to draw my vertical lines, you know, from line to line. All right, and I'll slide it down and do the same thing for my left line. All right, next and last, your border should be the darkest and most prominent line on the page. You're going to finish this with a 2H. So go back and darken this nice and hard all the way across from point to point to create a nice crisp 1/2 inch border all the way around your paper from corner to corner and so on. I won't bore you with the rest, but you finish that. Make sure your corners come to a point. If you want to erase the extra, you can use your eraser shield and just cover the part that you don't want to erase, which is the border. Just erase through it, and then you get a nice sharp corner. So you do that all 4 edges, and you get a nice sharp border. All right. Next, the Edpuzzle video talks about a title block or title box. That's just a little box in the bottom right corner. The dimensions aren't that critical. Maybe a 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch by inch. So measure up. Let's make it a 1/2 inch big, maybe an inch wide. Okay. So this is where